Warriors and Valkyries, welcome to our Hall of Norse Tales. Before we embark on our journey through the fjords of imagination, don't forget to join our tribe. Ring the notification bell, raise your axes by giving a like, and leave in the comments which realm you're watching from. Now, settle close to the hearth, for our saga is about to begin. As the crisp autumn air nipped at her cheeks, young Freya tightened her fur cloak around her shoulders and ventured deeper into the misty mountains. The Jarl's daughter had always been curious about the world beyond her village, and today, her adventurous spirit had led her farther than ever before. The forest around her was alive with the vibrant colors of fall. Rich reds, warm oranges, and golden yellows painted the landscape. Leaves crunched beneath her boots as she climbed higher, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "I wonder what secrets these mountains hold," Freya whispered to herself, her breath visible in the cool air. As she rounded a bend in the rocky path, the mist thickened, obscuring her view. Freya paused, straining her eyes to see through the haze. A strange sound reached her ears, a soft rumbling noise unlike anything she had heard before. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Is anyone there?" The mist parted suddenly, revealing a sight that made Freya's heart skip a beat. There, not more than a stone's throw away, stood a creature she had only heard about in legends, a frost giant. But this was no fearsome warrior from the tales her father told. Instead, it was a young giant, not much older than herself in proportion. The giant's skin was a pale blue, like the sky on a clear winter's day, and his hair was white as freshly fallen snow. His eyes, wide with surprise, were the color of glacial ice. He stood nearly twice Freya's height, yet his posture was hunched, as if trying to make himself smaller. For a moment they stared at each other in stunned silence. Freya's hand instinctively went to the small knife at her belt, but something in the giant's expression made her pause. He looked just as scared as she felt. I won't hurt you," the giant said, his voice surprisingly gentle for his size. "My name is Jokul. What's yours?" Freya swallowed hard, gathering her courage. "I'm Freya," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you really a frost giant?" Jokul nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "And you're a human? I've never met one up close before." Curiosity began to override Freya's fear. She took a tentative step forward. "I've never met a frost giant before either. The stories say you're all terrifying and cruel, but you don't seem scary at all." Jokul's smile widened, revealing teeth as white as his hair. "And the stories we hear say that humans are destructive and untrustworthy, but you don't seem like that to me." Freya laughed, the tension in her body easing. "I guess we both had the wrong idea." As they talked, the mist around them began to clear, revealing a small, hidden valley nestled between the peaks. Jokul gestured towards it. "Would you like to see where I live? It's quite beautiful, especially at this time of year." Freya hesitated for a moment, then nodded eagerly. "I'd love to." As they walked side by side, an unlikely pair in the mountain wilderness, Freya felt a sense of wonder she had never experienced before. The valley was indeed beautiful, with crystal-clear streams running between fields of late-blooming wildflowers. "This is amazing," Freya breathed, taking in the sight. "Do you live here all alone?" Jokul's face fell slightly. "Most of the time. The other frost giants live further up the mountain. They don't always understand me." Freya felt a pang of sympathy. "I know how that feels. Sometimes I don't fit in with the other kids in my village either." As the day wore on, Freya and Jokul shared stories of their lives, finding more common ground than either had expected. They laughed at each other's jokes, marveled at the differences in their cultures, and began to forge a bond that transcended their physical differences. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of pink and orange, Freya realized she needed to return home. "I have to go," she said reluctantly. "My father will be worried." Jokul nodded, understanding in his eyes. Will you come back? I've enjoyed talking with you, Freya. Freya smiled brightly. Of course. This can be our secret place. Promise you'll be here? I promise, Jokul replied, his ice-blue eyes twinkling. As Freya made her way back down the mountain, her mind was whirling with the day's events. She had set out looking for adventure and found something far more precious, an unexpected friendship that would change her life forever. Little did Freya know that this chance encounter in the Misty Mountains was just the beginning of an extraordinary journey. A journey that would not only bridge the gap between frost giants and Vikings, but also teach both their peoples the true meaning of friendship, acceptance, and the power of looking beyond appearances. As she reached the edge of her village, Freya turned to look back at the mountains, now silhouetted against the twilight sky. She whispered a quiet promise to the wind. I'll be back, Jokul. This is just the beginning. As the seasons changed, painting the landscape with vibrant hues of gold, rich reds, and finally the pristine white of winter, Freya and Jokul's bond grew stronger with each passing day. Their secret meetings in the hidden valley became a cherished ritual, a time when both could shed the expectations of their respective worlds and simply be themselves. One crisp winter evening, as the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Freya trudged through the snow-covered path to their meeting spot. Her cheeks were rosy from the cold, but her heart was warm with anticipation. Jokul, she called out as she entered the valley. Are you here? A moment later, the young frost giant appeared from behind a large boulder, his ice-blue eyes sparkling with joy. Freya, I was worried you might not come today. The snow is quite deep. Freya laughed, shaking the snow from her fur-lined boots. A little snow won't keep me away. Besides, I brought something special today. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small cloth-wrapped package. As she unfolded it, the aroma of freshly baked bread filled the air. I convinced our baker to teach me how to make honey cakes, Freya explained, offering one to Jokul. I thought you might like to try them. Jokul's eyes widened with delight as he carefully took the small cake between his large fingers. He took a bite, and a look of pure bliss crossed his face. This is amazing, he exclaimed. I've never tasted anything like it. Thank you, Freya. As they sat together, sharing the honey cakes and watching the stars appear one by one, Freya couldn't help but marvel at how comfortable she felt in Jokul's presence. You know, she said softly, sometimes I forget that you're a frost giant. When I'm with you, it just feels like I'm with my best friend. Jokul smiled, a touch of sadness in his eyes. I feel the same way, but I wonder, do you ever wish you could tell others about our friendship? Freya sighed, leaning back against a snow-covered rock. Sometimes. There are moments when I want to share all the wonderful things I've learned from you with my family and friends, but then I remember the stories they tell about frost giants, the fear in their eyes when they speak of your kind, and I just can't. Jokul nodded, understanding etched on his face. It's the same for me. The other frost giants, they speak of humans as if they're all violent and greedy. If they knew about you, about how kind and brave you are, maybe they'd change their minds. Maybe someday, Freya said, hope coloring her voice. For now, though, this is our secret, our special place where we can just be ourselves. As the night deepened, Freya and Jokul shared stories of their respective worlds. Jokul told tales of ancient frost giant lore, of ice palaces hidden deep within glaciers, and of magic that could shape the very snow and frost. Freya, in turn, shared Viking sagas, tales of brave warriors and cunning tricksters, and the everyday joys and struggles of village life. Tell me more about your father, Jokul asked, his voice filled with curiosity. What's it like being the daughter of a jarl? Freya chuckled, shaking her head. It's not as exciting as you might think. There's a lot of responsibility, a lot of expectations. Sometimes I feel like I'm living two lives. The perfect jarl's daughter in the village, and the real me up here with you. Jokul reached out, gently patting Freya's shoulder with his large hand. I understand that feeling all too well. Among my people, I'm expected to be fierce and cold-hearted. But that's not who I am. With you, I can be myself. As the moon rose higher in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the snowy landscape, Freya realized how late it had grown. I should head back, she said reluctantly. But I'll return in 3 days, as always. Jokul nodded, rising to his feet. I'll be here. And Freya, thank you. For the honey cakes, for your friendship, for everything. Freya smiled warmly. Thank you, Jokul. You've shown me a world I never knew existed, and I'm grateful for every moment we share. As Freya made her way back down the mountain, her heart was light, despite the heavy secret she carried. She knew that her friendship with Jokul was something precious, something that defied the boundaries set by their peoples. Entering her village, Freya straightened her back and smoothed her expression, once again becoming the Jarl's dutiful daughter. But inside, she held tight to the warmth of her secret friendship, a beacon of hope in a world divided by fear and misunderstanding. Little did Freya know that this secret friendship, nurtured in the quiet moments between human and frost giant, would soon be tested. The harsh winter ahead would challenge not only their bond, but also the very foundations of the beliefs held by both their peoples. Yet in those challenges lay the seeds of change, waiting for the right moment to bloom and bridge the gap between two worlds long divided. As the days grew shorter and the nights longer, an unprecedented winter descended upon Freya's village. The first snowfall came earlier than anyone could remember, blanketing the world in white. At first, the villagers welcomed it with joy, children frolicking in the fresh powder and adults admiring the pristine beauty. But as weeks passed, the relentless cold and unending snowfall began to take their toll. Freya stood at the window of her father's great hall, watching as another blizzard raged outside. The wind howled like a hungry wolf, rattling the sturdy wooden shutters. "Father," she said, turning to the Jarl who sat brooding by the fire, "how much longer can we endure this?" The Jarl, a man weathered by years of leadership, sighed heavily. "I don't know, my dear. Our food stores are running low and the hunting parties return with less game each day." Just then the door burst open, and Bjorn, the village's master hunter, stumbled in, shaking snow from his furs. "Jarl Eriksson," he gasped, his face etched with worry. "The situation is dire. The game has all but disappeared from the nearby forests. And the ice? It's too thick to break for fishing." The Jarl rose, his face grim. "Gather the council. We must discuss our options." As the village elders filed into the hall, Freya's mind raced. She couldn't help but think of Jokul, wondering how the frost giants were faring in this brutal winter. Surely they must know some secret to surviving such harsh conditions. The council meeting was somber, filled with grim reports and dwindling hope. "Our food stores will last another month at most," reported Astrid, the village's keeper of stores. "And that's if we start rationing immediately. The children and the elderly are already falling ill," added Helga, the healer. "Without proper nourishment, I fear for their lives." As the voices around her grew more desperate, Freya felt a resolve building within her. She knew she had to do something, even if it meant revealing her secret. "Father," she said, her voice cutting through the clamor, what if we could find help beyond our village?" The Jarl looked at her, surprise evident in his eyes. "What do you mean, Freya? The nearest village is days away, and in this weather..." Freya took a deep breath. "I don't mean other villages. I mean, what if we could seek help from those who know the winter better than anyone?" A hush fell over the room. It was Elder Sven who broke the silence, his voice trembling with age and fear. "Surely, child, you don't mean the frost giants? They are our enemies, monsters who would sooner see us dead than offer aid." Freya felt a flash of anger at the elder's words, thinking of gentle Jokul, but she kept her voice calm as she replied, "What if they're not the monsters we think they are? What if there's a chance they could help us?" The room erupted into chaos, voices shouting over one another. Some called the idea madness, while others, desperate for any solution, seemed willing to consider it. The Jarl raised his hand, silencing the crowd. Freya, what you suggest is dangerous. How can you be sure the frost giants wouldn't simply destroy us in our weakened state? Freya hesitated, knowing she was about to reveal her long-kept secret. Because I've met one. He's kind and gentle, nothing like the stories we've been told. Gasps and murmurs filled the hall. The Jarl's face paled, a mix of shock and concern etched in his features. You've met a frost giant? When? How? Over the past few months, Freya admitted. In the mountains. His name is Jokul, and he's become my friend. I believe he would help us if I asked. The silence that followed was deafening. Freya could see the struggle on her father's face, torn between his duty to protect the village and his trust in his daughter. Finally, the Jarl spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of decision. Freya, what you've done is dangerous beyond measure, and yet, we are out of options. If there's even a chance this frost giant could help us, we must take it. He turned to address the council. We will send a small party led by Freya to seek aid from the frost giants. It is a risk, but one we must take if we hope to survive this winter. As the council dispersed, filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation, Freya felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Her secret was out, and though she knew there would be consequences to face, for now, she had a chance to save her people. That night, as the blizzard raged on, Freya prepared for her journey. She packed supplies, warm furs, and a small token, one of the honey cakes she and Jokul had shared, carefully preserved. As she worked, she whispered a quiet prayer to the gods, hoping that her friendship with Jokul would be enough to bridge the ancient divide between their peoples. Little did Freya know that her brave decision would set in motion events that would change not only her village, but the relationship between humans and frost giants forever. As she drifted off to sleep, her last thoughts were of Jokul and the challenges that lay ahead. Tomorrow, she would embark on a journey that would test her courage, her friendship, and the very foundations of the world she thought she knew. High in the frost-covered mountains, far from the struggling Viking village, Jokul sat alone on a jagged outcropping of ice. His breath misted in the frigid air as he gazed down at the valley below, his ice-blue eyes filled with worry. Though the harsh winter that gripped the land was a comfort to most frost giants, Jokul found no joy in it. His thoughts were consumed by Freya and her people, whom he knew must be suffering in the unrelenting cold. What am I to do? He murmured to himself, his deep voice barely audible over the howling wind. I have the power to help them, but at what cost? As if in answer, a booming voice called out from behind him. Jokul, what are you doing out here alone? Jokul turned to see Thorstein, one of the elder frost giants, approaching. His massive form dwarfed Jokul's, and his long white beard was encrusted with icicles. Just thinking, Elder Thorstein, Jokul replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Thorstein settled beside him, the ice groaning under his weight. You've been distracted lately, young one. What troubles you? Jokul hesitated, torn between his desire to confide in someone and his fear of revealing his friendship with Freya. Finally he spoke, choosing his words carefully. Elder, have you ever wondered if the stories we tell about humans are true? If they're really as cruel and destructive as we've been led to believe? Thorstein's bushy eyebrows rose in surprise. What brings on such questions, Jokul? Surely you're not thinking of venturing into their territories. No, Jokul said quickly. I've been watching the valley below. The winter is harsh, even by our standards. I can't help but wonder how the humans are faring. The elder frost giant's expression softened slightly. Ah, I see. You have a gentle heart, Jokul. It's admirable, but also dangerous. Remember, the humans would destroy us if given the chance. Their suffering is not our concern. Jokul nodded, but inside his heart rebelled against these words. He thought of Freya's kindness, her curiosity, her willingness to see beyond the fearsome exterior of a frost giant. How could he reconcile that with the tales of human cruelty he'd been raised on? As Thorstein left, Jokul remained on the outcropping, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. He closed his eyes, remembering the warmth of Freya's smile, the sound of her laughter echoing through their secret valley. "Freya," he whispered, "what would you do in my place?" The wind seemed to carry her voice to him, a memory of one of their conversations. Sometimes, Jokul, doing the right thing means taking a risk. Opening his eyes, Jokul made a decision. He would go to their meeting place in the hidden valley. If Freya came, he would offer his help regardless of the consequences. As he made his way down the treacherous mountain path, Jokul's mind raced with possibilities and fears. What if Freya didn't come? What if she did, but rejected his offer of help? Worse still, what if accepting his help put her in danger from her own people? Reaching the valley, Jokul paced anxiously, his large feet leaving deep imprints in the snow. Hours passed, and as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Jokul's heart sank. Freya hadn't come. Just as he was about to leave, a small figure appeared at the entrance of the valley, struggling through the deep snow. Jokul's heart leaped as he recognized Freya, her face red from the cold but her eyes bright with determination. "Jokul!" she called out, her voice carrying a note of desperation. "I'm so glad you're here." He rushed to her side, careful not to knock her over with his enthusiasm. "Freya, I was worried you wouldn't come. Are you all right?" Freya shook her head, her expression grave. "No, Jokul. My village. We're in trouble. The winter is too harsh. Our food is running out and people are falling ill." Jokul felt a pang in his chest. This was the moment he had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. "Freya, I want to help, but I don't know how my people will react. And yours? Will they accept aid from a frost giant?" Freya reached out, placing her small hand on Jokul's arm. The warmth of her touch seemed to cut through his icy skin, reaching his very core. "They know about you, Jokul. I had to tell them. They're scared, but they're willing to accept help. We have no other choice." Jokul's eyes widened in surprise. "You told them about me? About us?" Freya nodded, a small smile playing on her lips despite the gravity of the situation. "I did. It wasn't easy, but it was the right thing to do. Now will you help us?" In that moment, looking into Freya's eyes, Jokul knew his decision was made. The consequences didn't matter. His friendship with Freya, the lives of her people, the chance to bridge the gap between their kinds, it was all worth the risk. "Yes," he said, his voice filled with newfound resolve. "I'll help, whatever it takes." As Freya's face lit up with relief and gratitude, Jokul felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He knew the path ahead would be difficult, fraught with danger and uncertainty. But he also knew that in choosing to help, he was being true to himself and to the friendship that had changed his life. Together, Jokul and Freya began to plan, their voices mixing with the wind as they discussed how a frost giant might save a village of humans. As night fell, bringing with it the glittering stars and the shimmer of Aurora Borealis, a new hope was born in that secret valley. A hope that would soon challenge the long-held beliefs of both their peoples and pave the way for an unprecedented alliance. As the first light of dawn broke over the snow-covered village, Freya stood at the edge of her home, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. The decision to seek Jokul's help had not been an easy one, but as she looked at the haggard faces of her fellow villagers, she knew it was their only hope. "Freya," her father's voice called out behind her. She turned to see the Jarl approaching, his face etched with worry. "Are you certain about this? The journey to the mountains is treacherous, and the frost giant, can we truly trust him?" Freya took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Father, I know it's hard to believe, but Jokul is different. He's kind, gentle, and he cares. I've seen it with my own eyes. If there's any chance he can help us, we have to try." The Jarl nodded slowly, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Your courage gives me strength, my child, but promise me you'll be careful. If there's any sign of danger, you must return immediately. I promise, Father, Freya replied, embracing him tightly. As she prepared to leave, a small group gathered around her. Bjorn, the master hunter, stepped forward, his usually confident demeanor subdued by concern. I still think this is madness, he muttered. But if anyone can pull it off, it's you, Freya. Take this, he added, handing her a small, intricately carved horn. Blow it if you're in trouble, and we'll come for you. Freya accepted the horn gratefully, tucking it into her satchel. With a final wave to her people, she set off towards the mountains, the weight of her village's fate heavy on her shoulders. The journey was arduous. The snow, which had seemed magical during her secret meetings with Jokul, now felt oppressive and dangerous. Each step was a struggle, the icy wind cutting through her furs like a knife. As she climbed higher, Freya's mind raced with doubts. What if Jokul wasn't there? What if he refused to help? What if this was all a terrible mistake? No, she whispered to herself, her breath visible in the frigid air. I have to believe. Jokul will help. He has to. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Freya reached the entrance to their secret valley. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, and her fingers were numb despite her thick gloves. But as she caught sight of a familiar blue figure in the distance, a surge of hope gave her renewed strength. Jokul, she called out, her voice hoarse from the cold. Jokul, I'm here. The young frost giant turned, his ice-blue eyes widening in surprise and concern. In an instant he was by her side, his massive form shielding her from the biting wind. Freya, what are you doing here in this weather? You could have frozen to death. Jokul's voice was filled with worry as he gently brushed snow from her cloak. Freya looked up at her friend, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. Jokul, we need your help. My village. We're dying. The winter is too harsh. Our food is almost gone, and people are falling ill. You're our only hope. Jokul's expression shifted from concern to shock, then to deep thought. Freya, I want to help, but my people, they would never understand. And your village, would they even accept aid from a frost giant? Freya reached out, placing her small hand on Jokul's arm. Even through her glove, she could feel the coolness of his skin. I told them about you, Jokul, about our friendship. They're scared, but they're willing to accept help. We have no other choice. Jokul's eyes widened. You told them? Freya, that must have been so difficult. I don't know what to say. Say you'll help us, Freya pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper. Please, Jokul. I know it's asking a lot, but without you, my people won't survive this winter. For a moment, Jokul was silent, his gaze fixed on the snowy peaks around them. Freya held her breath, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure Jokul could hear it. Finally, the frost giant spoke, his voice filled with a newfound resolve. Yes, I'll help you, Freya. Whatever it takes. Relief washed over Freya like a warm wave, and she found herself laughing and crying at the same time. Thank you, Jokul. Thank you so much. As they began to discuss plans, Freya felt a glimmer of hope spark in her chest. It was a dangerous path they were embarking on, one that could change everything for both their peoples. But looking at Jokul's determined face, she knew they could face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. We should leave soon, Jokul said, glancing at the darkening sky. The storm will get worse after nightfall. Freya nodded, but as she took a step, her exhaustion caught up with her. She stumbled, her legs giving way beneath her. Freya, Jokul cried out, catching her before she fell. You're exhausted. Here, let me carry you. Before she could protest, Jokul had scooped her up in his arms, cradling her against his chest. Despite the cold of his skin, Freya felt safe and warm. Rest now, Jokul said softly. I'll wake you when we reach your village. As Freya drifted off to sleep, lulled by the steady rhythm of Jokul's steps, she knew that her brave decision had set in motion events that would change both their worlds forever. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, a testament to the power of friendship and the courage to look beyond differences. The journey back to the village would be long and fraught with danger. But in that moment, nestled in the arms of her frost giant friend, Freya felt a sense of peace. She had taken the first step towards saving her people and bridging the gap between two worlds long divided. As sleep claimed her, a small smile played on her lips, for she knew that sometimes the bravest decisions are the ones that bring us closest to those we once fear. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the snow-covered landscape in hues of pink and gold, Jokul and Freya approached the outskirts of the Viking village. The frost giant's massive form cast a long shadow across the glistening snow, while Freya, now awake and walking beside him, felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness flutter in her chest. "We're almost there," Freya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you ready for this, Jokul?" The young frost giant took a deep breath, his ice-blue eyes scanning the village in the distance. "As ready as I'll ever be," he replied, his deep voice tinged with uncertainty. "I just hope your people will give me a chance." As they drew closer, shouts of alarm rang out from the village. Figures emerged from the houses, some brandishing weapons, others simply staring in awe and fear at the approaching frost giant. "Stay calm," Freya urged Jokul. "Let me talk to them first." The Jarl, Freya's father, stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Freya," he called out, relief and concern mingling in his voice. "Step away from the giant." Freya stood her ground, raising her hands in a placating gesture. "Father, everyone, please listen. This is Jokul, my friend. He's here to help us." A murmur ran through the gathered villagers. Bjorn, the master hunter, pushed his way to the front of the crowd. "Help us? How can a frost giant help us? They're the ones who brought this cursed winter upon us." Jokul flinched at the accusation, but Freya spoke up before he could respond. "That's not true, Bjorn. Jokul and his kind don't control the weather any more than we do, but they do know how to survive in it, and Jokul has agreed to share that knowledge with us." The Jarl studied Jokul intently. His eyes narrowed. "Is this true, Frost Giant? You would help us, your supposed enemies?" Jokul knelt down, bringing himself closer to eye level with the humans. Some gasped and stepped back, but the Jarl held his ground. "It is true," Jokul said, his voice gentle despite its deep timbre. "Freya has shown me that there is more to humans than the stories we've been told. I want to help, if you'll let me." For a long moment, silence reigned. Then, the Jarl nodded slowly. "Very well. Show us what you can do." Relieved, Jokul rose to his feet and surveyed the village. "First," he said, "we need to protect your homes from the worst of the cold." With careful movements, Jokul began to manipulate the ice and snow around him. The villagers watched in awe as he created intricate ice structures that resembled delicate lattice work. These he placed around the houses, forming a barrier against the biting wind. "These will help insulate your homes," Jokul explained. "The design allows some air to flow through but breaks up the strongest gusts." Next, Jokul turned his attention to the village's dwindling food supplies. With a wave of his hand, he created a series of beautiful ice containers. "These will keep your food fresh for much longer," he said. "The ice is special. It won't melt unless exposed to direct flame, and it will maintain a constant cool temperature." As Jokul worked, the initial fear of the villagers began to give way to curiosity and even admiration. Children peeked out from behind their parents' legs, pointing and whispering in excitement at the magical-seeming ice creations. Helga, the village healer, approached Jokul cautiously. "Frost Giant," she said, her voice quavering slightly. "Many of our people are ill from the cold. Is there anything you can do to help them?" Jokul's face softened with compassion. "I can try," he said. "Show me to the sick." As Jokul followed Helga to the longhouse where the ill were being cared for, Freya felt a swell of pride in her friend. She caught her father's eye and saw a glimmer of approval there. Inside the longhouse, Jokul knelt beside a bed where a young child lay shivering despite the furs piled atop her. With gentle hands, he created a small, glowing ice crystal. "This will help regulate her body temperature," he explained to the astonished parents. "It will cool her if she develops a fever, and warm her if she gets too cold." As the day wore on, Jokul continued to use his frost giant powers in ways the villagers had never imagined possible. He created ice bridges to connect the village to vital resources that had been cut off by the deep snow. He fashioned tools of unbreakable ice to help with hunting and fishing, and all the while he answered questions, explained his methods, and showed a patience and kindness that slowly but surely began to change the villagers' perceptions. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the transformed village, the Jarl approached Jokul and Freya. "I must admit," he said, his voice gruff but sincere, "I had my doubts, but what you've done for us today, it's nothing short of miraculous. You have our deepest gratitude, Jokul." Jokul bowed his head respectfully. "I'm glad I could help, and I hope this can be the beginning of a new understanding between our peoples." Freya beamed up at her friend, her heart full of joy and hope. She knew that this was just the beginning, that there would be challenges ahead as they navigated this new relationship between frost giants and Vikings. But looking around at her village, now protected and renewed by Jokul's kindness, she felt certain that they were on the right path. As the villagers began to disperse, preparing for the first comfortable night they'd had in weeks, Freya took Jokul's large hand in her small one. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Jokul smiled down at her, his ice blue eyes warm with affection. "No, Freya. Thank you for giving me the courage to do this. Together, I think we might just change the world." And as they stood there, a frost giant and a human united in friendship, the first stars of evening twinkled overhead, bearing witness to a new chapter in the history of their two peoples. As the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow across the snow-covered landscape, the villagers of Freya's home stirred from their uneasy slumber. The harsh winter had taken its toll, leaving them weary and worried. But today would be different. Today, everything would change. The first to spot the approaching figures was young Eric, the baker's son, who had climbed to the watchtower for his morning shift. His eyes widened in disbelief as he saw the massive form of Jokul walking beside Freya. "Gods above," he gasped, fumbling for the warning horn. The deep, resonant sound echoed through the village, rousing everyone from their homes. Within moments, the village square was filled with people, their faces a mix of fear, curiosity, and desperate hope. The Jarl pushed his way to the front, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Steady now," he commanded, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Let's not do anything rash." As Jokul and Freya drew closer, a collective gasp rippled through the gathered villagers. Many had never seen a frost giant up close before, and Jokul's towering form was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Freya stepped forward, her chin held high despite the nervous tremor in her voice. "Everyone, please, don't be afraid. This is Jokul, my friend. He's here to help us." A murmur of disbelief ran through the crowd. Astrid, the village's keeper of stores, spoke up, her voice quavering. "Help us? But he's a frost giant. They're our enemies." Jokul knelt down, trying to appear less intimidating. His ice blue eyes scanned the faces before him, seeing the fear and mistrust etched in their features. "I know you have no reason to trust me," he said, his deep voice gentle. "But I assure you, I mean you no harm. I've come because Freya told me of your plight, and I want to help." The Jarl stepped forward, studying Jokul intently. "And how exactly do you propose to help us, Frost Giant?" Jokul smiled, a warm expression that seemed at odds with his icy appearance. "I have knowledge of surviving in harsh winters that I can share with you, and I have abilities that might be of use." To demonstrate, Jokul raised his hand, concentrating. Before the astonished eyes of the villagers, a delicate structure of ice began to form in the air. It was a perfect miniature of their village, each building rendered in exquisite detail. By the gods, whispered Bjorn, the master hunter, his earlier hostility forgotten in the face of this marvel. Children, initially hiding behind their parents' legs, began to creep forward, their eyes wide with wonder. Little Ingrid, barely 5 summers old, reached out a mittened hand towards the ice sculpture. "It's beautiful," she breathed, her fear completely forgotten. Jokul's smile widened. "Would you like to see more?" he asked gently. As the villagers watched in amazement, Jokul began to use his frost giant powers to address their most pressing needs. He created intricate ice barriers around their homes, explaining how they would help insulate against the bitter cold. He fashioned tools of unbreakable ice for hunting and fishing, and showed them how to construct shelters that would withstand the harshest blizzards. Helga, the village healer, hesitantly approached Jokul. "These abilities of yours, where could they help our sick?" Jokul nodded solemnly. "I believe so. Show me to them, and I'll do what I can." As the day wore on, the initial fear and distrust of the villagers began to thaw like ice under the spring sun. Children laughed and played in the magical ice structures Jokul created, while adults marveled at the ingenuity of his solutions to their winter woes. Freya stood by her friend's side, her heart swelling with pride and joy. She caught her father's eye and saw the grudging respect there, mixed with a hint of wonder. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, the Jarl called for everyone's attention. "People of the village," he began, his voice carrying across the now transformed square. "Today, we have witnessed something extraordinary. A frost giant, one we have long considered our enemy, has shown us kindness and generosity beyond measure." He turned to Jokul, who stood tall but humble. "Jokul, on behalf of our village, I thank you. You have given us hope when we thought all was lost." A cheer went up from the crowd, startling both Jokul and Freya. The sound of applause and shouts of gratitude filled the air, a stark contrast to the fearful silence of just hours before. As the celebration continued around them, Freya tugged on Jokul's hand, leading him slightly away from the crowd. "You did it," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears of joy. "You changed their minds just like you changed mine." Jokul knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with his human friend. "We did it together, Freya. Your bravery in bringing me here and standing by my side, that's what made this possible." As they looked out over the village, now bustling with renewed energy and hope, Freya felt a profound sense of change in the air. The impossible had happened. A frost giant had become a hero to a village of Vikings. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice soft with wonder. Jokul's gaze swept over the horizon, towards the mountains where his own people dwelled. "Now," he said, a note of determination in his voice, "we bridge the gap between our worlds. This is just the beginning, Freya. Together we can change everything." As night fell and the stars began to twinkle overhead, the village continued to celebrate their unexpected salvation. The fear that had gripped them for so long had been replaced by hope, and the presence of a frost giant in their midst no longer seemed strange, but wonderful. In that moment, as humans and frost giants stood side by side, a new chapter in their shared history began to unfold. One of understanding, cooperation, and the astonishing power of kindness to overcome even the deepest-rooted fears. As the days passed, the initial shock of Jokul's presence in the village gradually gave way to a cautious curiosity. The frost giant's tireless efforts to help the villagers survive the harsh winter had not gone unnoticed, and slowly but surely, the barriers of mistrust began to crumble. One crisp morning, as Jokul was demonstrating how to construct an ice shelter to a group of fascinated villagers, Bjorn, the master hunter, approached him. The burly man's face was a mask of conflicting emotions as he cleared his throat to speak. "Jokul," Bjorn began, his voice gruff but not unkind. I owe you an apology. When you first arrived, I was certain you meant us harm. I see now that I was wrong." Jokul turned to face the hunter, a gentle smile playing on his lips. "There's no need for apologies, Bjorn. Your caution was understandable, I'm just glad I've had the chance to show you another side of frost giants." Bjorn nodded, a look of wonder crossing his face. "Indeed you have. I never thought I'd say this, but would you be willing to join me on a hunt? Your ice abilities could be invaluable in tracking game in this weather." The frost giant's eyes lit up with excitement. "I'd be honored, Bjorn. Perhaps we can learn from each other." As Jokul and Bjorn set off into the snowy forest, Freya watched from the edge of the village, her heart swelling with pride. She felt a presence beside her and turned to see Astrid, the village's keeper of stores. "It's remarkable, isn't it?" Astrid mused, her eyes following the unlikely pair. "A few weeks ago, the very thought of a frost giant in our midst would have sent us into a panic. Now look at us." Freya nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "It just goes to show how powerful acceptance can be. When we open our hearts and minds, we discover that our differences aren't as insurmountable as we once thought." As the days turned into weeks, more and more villagers began to seek out Jokul's company. Children would gather around him in the evenings, begging for stories of the frost giant realm. The village elders, initially the most skeptical, now sought his counsel on matters of survival and resource management. One evening, as Jokul sat by the great fire in the center of the village, little Ingrid climbed onto his lap, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Jokul," she asked, her small voice filled with wonder, "do frost giants have families like we do?" The giant's expression softened as he looked down at the child. "We do, little one. We have mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, just like you. Our families might look different, but the love we feel for each other is the same." Ingrid's mother, who had been listening nearby, stepped closer. "I never thought about it that way," she admitted. "It's strange how we can forget that those we consider different still share so much in common with us." Jokul nodded, his ice blue eyes twinkling. "That's the beauty of getting to know one another. We discover that beneath our differences, we're all seeking the same things: love, safety, belonging." As the conversation flowed, more villagers gathered around, eager to learn about frost giant culture and share their own traditions. The air was filled with laughter and animated discussion, the earlier tension all but forgotten. Freya's father, the Jarl, watched the scene from a distance, a thoughtful expression on his face. He beckoned his daughter over. "Freya," he said, his voice low, "I owe you an apology. When you first told us about your friendship with Jokul, I thought you were being naive. I see now that you saw something in him that the rest of us were too blinded by prejudice to see." Freya embraced her father, tears of joy pricking at her eyes. "Thank you, Father. That means more to me than you know." The Jarl squeezed his daughter's shoulder before addressing the gathered villagers. "My people," he called out, his voice carrying across the square. "These past weeks have taught us a valuable lesson. We have seen that those we once feared as enemies can become our greatest allies. Jokul has not only helped us survive this winter, but has also opened our eyes to the possibility of a new future, one where frost giants and humans live in harmony." A cheer went up from the crowd, and Jokul bowed his head humbly, clearly moved by the Jarl's words. As the celebration continued into the night, Freya found herself standing beside Jokul, watching the villagers dance and laugh around the fire. "Did you ever imagine it could be like this?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. Jokul shook his head, a smile playing on his lips. "Never in my wildest dreams. But this is only the beginning, Freya. There's still so much work to be done, so many more minds to change, both among your people and mine." Freya nodded, determination shining in her eyes. "And we'll do it together. One step at a time, one heart at a time. We'll build bridges between our worlds." As the fire crackled and the stars twinkled overhead, the village stood as a testament to the power of acceptance. What had begun as a desperate plea for help had blossomed into something far greater, a new understanding between two peoples long divided by fear and mistrust. In that moment, As humans and frost giants celebrated side by side, the future seemed bright with possibility. The harsh winter that had threatened to destroy them had instead become the catalyst for a change that would reshape their world forever. As the harsh winter slowly gave way to the first tentative signs of spring, the relationship between Jokul and the villagers continued to flourish. What had begun as a desperate alliance for survival had blossomed into something far more profound, a bridge between two worlds that had long been divided by fear and misunderstanding. One crisp morning, as the sun peeked over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Freya found Jokul standing at the edge of the village, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, coming to stand beside her frost giant friend. Jokul turned to her, his ice-blue eyes filled with a mix of hope and trepidation. "I was thinking about my people, Freya, about how they might react if they knew what has happened here." Freya nodded, understanding the weight of his words. "Do you think they would accept this new friendship between us?" Before Jokul could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of the Jarl, Freya's father. "I couldn't help but overhear," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "Jokul, I believe it's time we took the next step. We should reach out to your people, show them what we've accomplished here." Jokul's eyes widened in surprise. "You would do that? Even knowing the risks?" The Jarl nodded solemnly. "Peace is always worth the risk. Besides, after all you've done for us, how could we not try to bridge the gap with your kind?" And so, plans were set in motion. A delegation from the village, led by the Jarl and including Freya, would accompany Jokul to the realm of the frost giants. As word spread through the village, a mixture of excitement and apprehension filled the air. On the morning of their departure, the entire village gathered to see them off. Bjorn, the master hunter, approached Jokul with a beautifully crafted spear in his hands. "I made this for you," he said, offering the weapon to the frost giant. "It's a symbol of trust and friendship. May it serve you well in your own realm." Jokul accepted the gift with reverence, his voice thick with emotion as he replied, "Thank you, Bjorn. This means more to me than you can know." As the small group set off towards the mountains, the villagers' voices raised in a song of hope and farewell. The journey was long and challenging, but finally, they reached the outskirts of the frost giant territory. Jokul turned to his human companions, his face serious. "Remember, my people have never seen humans up close before. They may react with fear or hostility at first. Stay close to me, and let me do the talking." As they entered the frost giant settlement, gasps and murmurs of shock rippled through the gathered giants. Jokul stood tall, his voice ringing out clear and strong. "My people, I have returned, and I bring with me friends, humans who have shown me kindness and acceptance. They come in peace, seeking to build a bridge between our worlds." For a moment, silence reigned. Then, an elder frost giant stepped forward, his ancient eyes studying the humans with intense curiosity. "Jokul," he said, his voice like rolling thunder, "explain yourself. How came you to befriend these humans?" And so Jokul told their story, of Freya's bravery, of the village's desperate need, and of the bonds of friendship that had formed in the face of adversity. As he spoke, the frost giants listened, their expressions slowly shifting from suspicion to wonder. When Jokul finished, the Jarl stepped forward, bowing respectfully to the elder giant. "We come to you in the spirit of peace and cooperation. Our peoples have been divided for too long by fear and misunderstanding. We hope to change that, if you're willing." The elder was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving from the Jarl to Freya, and finally resting on Jokul. Then, to everyone's amazement, he smiled. "For centuries, we have believed humans to be our enemies," he said, his voice softening. "But if Jokul speaks true, and I believe he does, then perhaps it is time for a new chapter in our shared history." A murmur of agreement spread through the gathered frost giants. Freya felt her heart swell with hope as she watched giants and humans begin to mingle, curiosity overcoming their initial wariness. As the day wore on, An impromptu celebration began. Giants shared their knowledge of ice magic, creating spectacular sculptures that left the humans in awe. In return, the humans shared stories of their customs and traditions, bridging the cultural gap, one tale at a time. As night fell, Freya found herself sitting beside a young frost giantess named Skadi. "I never imagined I'd be sharing a meal with a human," Skadi admitted, her voice filled with wonder. Freya smiled, passing her a piece of the honey cake she had brought from the village. "And I never thought I'd be friends with frost giants. It just goes to show how much we can learn when we open our hearts to new possibilities." Nearby, Jokul and the Jarl were deep in conversation with the elder giant, discussing ways to formalize the newfound peace between their peoples. Trade agreements were proposed, cultural exchanges planned, and promises of mutual aid in times of need were made. As the celebration continued under the star-filled sky, Freya felt a profound sense of change in the air. This was more than just a temporary truce. It was the dawn of a new era of understanding between frost giants and humans. Looking around at the scene of joyful interaction, Freya caught Jokul's eye. They shared a smile, both knowing that their unlikely friendship had been the spark that ignited this remarkable change. The path ahead would not be easy. Centuries of mistrust and fear could not be erased overnight. But as giants and humans laughed and celebrated together under the aurora borealis, the future seemed bright with possibility. A new chapter in their shared history had begun, one of cooperation, understanding, and the unifying power of friendship. Years had passed since that fateful winter when Freya first brought Jokul to her village. The once unthinkable alliance between frost giants and Vikings had blossomed into a thriving partnership that had transformed both societies. As the sun rose on a crisp autumn morning, Freya, now a respected leader in her own right, stood at the edge of the village, watching a group of children at play. Among them was her own daughter Astrid, her golden hair glinting in the sunlight as she laughed and ran alongside a young frost giant named Bjarka. The sight never failed to fill Freya's heart with joy and pride. "It still amazes me sometimes," a deep, familiar voice rumbled beside her. Freya turned to see Jokul, his ice-blue eyes twinkling with warmth as he watched the children. "What does?" Freya asked, though she already knew the answer. Jokul gestured towards the playing children. "This, frost giant and human children playing together as if it were the most natural thing in the world. When we first met, I never could have imagined such a future." Freya nodded, a smile playing on her lips. "It's a beautiful sight, isn't it? They're growing up without the fear and mistrust that divided our peoples for so long." As they watched, little Astrid approached them, dragging Bjarka along by his much larger hand. "Mama, Papa Jokul," she called out excitedly. "Can you tell us the story again? About how you became friends and saved the village?" Jokul chuckled, kneeling down to be closer to the children's level. "Again? You've heard that story 100 times, little one." Bjarka nodded eagerly, his young face serious. "But it's important, Papa Jokul. It's how everything changed." Freya and Jokul exchanged a fond glance. "You're right, Bjarka," Freya said softly. "It is important. Come, let's sit by the fire, and we'll tell you the tale once more." As they settled around the central fire pit, other children and adults, both human and frost giant, began to gather, drawn by the promise of the familiar yet ever-inspiring story. Freya began, her voice taking on a storyteller's cadence. It was the harshest winter our village had ever known. Food was scarce and many were falling ill. It seemed all hope was lost. As Freya and Jokul took turns narrating their tale, the gathered crowd listened with rapt attention. Even those who had heard the story many times before found themselves captivated, caught up in the magic of that first unlikely friendship. When they finished, an elderly Viking named Gunnar spoke up, his voice gravelly with age. "I remember those days well. I was one of those who feared and mistrusted Jokul when he first arrived. But seeing him work tirelessly to save our village, it changed something in me, in all of us." Helga, now a respected frost giant healer who split her time between both communities, nodded in agreement. It was the same for many of us frost giants. The tales of Viking cruelty had been passed down for generations. But when we saw the friendship between Jokul and Freya, it opened our eyes to new possibilities. As the conversation flowed, touching on the challenges and triumphs of the past years, Freya marveled at how far they had come. The annual Frost Fair, where both communities came together to celebrate their shared culture, was now a highly anticipated event. Trade between the two peoples had led to unprecedented prosperity for both, and perhaps most importantly, marriages between frost giants and humans, once unthinkable, were now celebrated joyously. Later that evening, as the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Freya found herself walking with her old friend Bjorn, the former master hunter who now served as an ambassador to the frost giant realm. "You know, Freya," Bjorn mused, "I often wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been brave enough to befriend Jokul all those years ago. Our world would be so different." Freya nodded thoughtfully. "It's strange to think about, isn't it? One small act of kindness, one decision to look beyond appearances and see the person beneath. It changed everything." As they walked, they passed the village school where both human and frost giant children learned side by side. Through the window, they could see an elderly frost giant teaching a group of attentive young humans the intricacies of ice magic. "That's the real legacy, isn't it?" Bjorn said, gesturing towards the school. "Not just peace between our peoples, but a new generation that doesn't even remember a time when we were enemies." Freya smiled, her heart full. "You're right. They're growing up in a world where friendship between frost giants and humans is normal, expected even. They'll face their own challenges, I'm sure, but at least they're starting from a place of understanding and acceptance." As they made their way back to the village center, where preparations for the upcoming Frost Fair were already underway, Freya felt a profound sense of gratitude. The story of her friendship with Jokul had become legend, a tale told not just in her village but in frost giant settlements and human villages far and wide. It served as a reminder that even in the darkest times, a single act of kindness could light the way forward. That friendship could bridge the widest gaps, and that understanding could melt even the coldest hearts. As Freya watched her daughter Astrid help Bjarka hang ice lanterns for the fair, she knew that their legacy would live on in these children and in the generations to come. A legacy of courage, of open-mindedness, and of the enduring power of friendship to change the world.